This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 49, December 10th, 2019. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. My guest for this episode is Gergő Tisza, although he sometimes also goes by Tisza Gergő. Gergő is a senior software engineer at the Wikimedia Foundation working in the Growth team. Before that, he also worked in the Multimedia and Reading Infrastructure teams. I've met Gergő at a few enterprise MediaWiki conferences, and he was also recently at the Wikimedia Technical Conference, which is invitation only. I'm planning to ask him about all those things and more. So, Gergő, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, I believe your name is Hungarian. Where do you live?
I spent half the year in Hungary, in Sopron, which is the Austrian border of Hungary, and the other half of the year in San Francisco, usually.
Yeah, okay. So, I have to ask, does that mean that you work at the Wikimedia Foundation office?
Yeah, when I'm in San Francisco, I do that.
Wow, okay. Well, this is a historic moment. We're approaching 50 episodes of this podcast now, and I'm finally talking to someone who works, well, I guess I can say full-time half the time at the Wikimedia Foundation office. There was somebody who worked a few days of the week, but if you're there 5 days a week, that's I think that's close enough to count. We've finally done it.
It tends to be fairly empty, yes.
Oh, is that true? Okay. I think there's it's a combination of a few things. Maybe there aren't that many people there. Then some of the people who work there are, I guess, publicity shy. I won't say anything more than that. But so how did you end up working for the Wikimedia Foundation?
Well, I started editing Wikipedia, I think, 15 years ago. And it was always a natural destination. So Wikipedia is a big part of my free time, my hobby. I am very invested in the project. I got involved in the organization behind it, so the Hungarian sister organization of the Wikimedia Foundation, and seemed like a natural idea to spend the 8 hours in the day that I spent working on the same project that I spend my free time on as a volunteer.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I applied 6 years ago, I think, and got hired. Not much more than that. Yeah,
okay. So were you editing the Hungarian language Wikipedia?
Mostly Hungarian, yes.
Well, I guess a typical story for people on this podcast who started out with Wikipedia is it started out with editing, and then it became modifying gadgets and modules. Well, not modules. That's a little beforehand, but gadgets and JavaScript and CSS and so forth, and sort of became more and more serious after that.
Yes, those kind of things happened. Although I didn't start actually working on MediaWiki until I got hired. But I definitely did translations, technical documentation writing, gadgets, bug reporting, those kind of things.
Yeah. And do you have a programming background?
Yes, I'm a programmer used to be a programmer in my professional life before. So before the foundation, right. I worked for Rocket Internet in Germany, which is a very at least locally very infamous startup incubator kind of thing with a somewhat bad reputation of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Rocket Internet.
Okay. Well, I'll put a link there to it on the podcast episode page, and people can find out for themselves, or not, or maybe I shouldn't do that. Okay. So you work for the Growth team now. How long have you been there?
Oh, I just switched a little less than 2 months ago, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I have some questions about growth stuff, but you you may or may not be able to answer them. I mean, well, I'm sure you know. What's the purpose of the growth team?
So the growth team is currently focusing on contributors in their very early stage. So the first few days or maybe the first few weeks after registration. I mean, the general mission, of course, is to make the editing communities grow. But
Right.
specifically, we are trying to ease the confusion of people entering and trying to edit Wikipedia for the first time and meeting a bunch of policies that they are expected to know about but probably don't, finding interfaces which are not very typical for the internet today, and trying to provide them with features which help with that. Specifically, that means features that try to connect them with experienced editors, mentors, features which make it easy to ask questions. Currently, we are working on task recommendations, so identifying articles that experienced editors have tagged as needing a certain kind of work, and then pointing new editors to those and explaining what work is needed.
Yeah. I looked through the set of pages for the growth team on MediaWiki.org. I have to say, I think the documentation needs some work. I don't think you wrote it, so I feel safe saying that. You guys provide some set of tools for different Wikipedias to use, as you explained. It's hard to figure out what that set of tools actually is. Some of the documentation talks about growth tools. There's other pages that talk about growth experiments, and then there's something about personalized first day initiatives. Are those all the same thing?
Those are pretty much all the same thing. I would say it's, in my experience, it's one of the better documented initiatives.
All right.
So it could be worse, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, GrowthExperiments is the name of the extension, which contains almost all of the features. And the first day experience is a bunch of logging related features which live at many different places. So that was basically just collecting enough information to be able to find out what people do on their first day.
So from what I understand, these are installed only on a relatively few Wikipedias at this point.
Yes, I believe 5 Wikipedias currently.
So if some new Wikipedia asks for growth tools to be installed there, what are they going to get?
Well, the same thing after they go through the process of translating it and providing certain information that's needed for enabling it. The process is documented somewhere on the team page.
So, I mean, what's an example of a tool that will show up on that Wikipedia?
So, the main tool is the newcomer homepage. That means that when you click on your username, then instead of getting an edit page where you can write about yourself, you get a special page with all kinds of information, with prompts on doing the basic steps if you haven't done them yet, like setting an email address and creating a user page, and information on help pages, search interface to help pages, an easy interface for asking questions on the relevant community page where new editors are supposed to ask questions, information about your edits, like if you edited some articles, then it exposes how many people have seen your edits, so what is the impact that your work has made. And the feature we are currently working on, which is still in deployment, still in development, so only a few select wikis get it, even within the wikis which have growth features, that is task recommendations. So getting prompts of which articles to work on and what kind of work to do on them.
Yeah, okay. Do you have any sense for what impact this homepage thing and other features have had on user growth or editor retention?
I think we don't really have that information yet. So we are working with medium-sized wikis, and on those wikis, the number of people joining per month is small enough that if you want to get statistically significant information, then it takes a while to collect enough data. So we are doing an A/B test where half the people get this feature and half of them don't. And I think it's usually something like 6 months after reliable answer can be given to that question, and these features are not that old yet.
Yeah. From a technical perspective, are you using, is it mostly in JavaScript? Are you using OOUI and that kind of stuff for this?
The user interface is in OOUI, yes. I think most of the Wikimedia Foundation developed functionality these days uses OOUI.
Yeah. Is there any timeline for releasing all of these as general extensions or whatever they are, so other wikis outside of Wikipedia and so forth can use them?
Well, it is a general extension.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't think anything prevents you from using it. Some of the features are very specific, like task recommendations, heavily build on knowledge of what specific workflows Wikipedia articles have for designating tasks that need to be worked on. So you wouldn't be able to use them out of the box, but it shouldn't be very hard to modify it, and some of the features just work out of the box.
Yeah. What is the name of this extension or extensions? I didn't see them mention it.
Yeah, the name of the extension is GrowthExperiments.
Oh, okay. Experiments is part of the name.
Yeah, it's slightly confusing, and it packs together a number of slightly related features. So everything is in one extension, basically.
I see. Yeah, and the status is experimental, is appropriately enough, of this extension. I'm looking at the documentation now. I mean, presumably at some point it will no longer be experiments.
Yeah, we don't really have a good nomenclature of extension status. So it's not experimental in the sense that it has been deployed to the Wikimedia cluster.
Yeah, okay. It's more like stable. It's just the whole concept behind it is experimental.
Yeah, exactly.
I was more commenting on the name, which is, I mean, that presumably would change at some point. Or maybe not. Maybe it's forever.
In practice, changing the name of extensions is so much work that people tend not to do it.
All right. Okay. I guess moving on from growth stuff, you've been involved in a lot of authentication/authorization stuff on MediaWiki. I believe you're one of the main authors of the OAuth extension, for example, where I think that auth stands for authorization.
Yeah, I am, I guess, the current maintainer, or what goes the closest to maintainer, because it's not very well maintained. I'm not really an author, so I haven't written much of the code.
Well, maybe I shouldn't ask about this either then, but I'll just keep going. We'll see what happens. For those who don't know about it, I think authentication and authorization can be defined as using outside credentials within MediaWiki, whether it's from an LDAP server or Facebook or Google or even another wiki, so that you can log in at that other place and then be automatically logged into the wiki and automatically get your permissions set to the right level. Is that accurate?
Yes, although I think that mostly exists for authentication. So authorization is a very old part of MediaWiki, which isn't really doesn't really have any kind of external integration short of hex done in extensions. So the authentication part of MediaWiki has been rewritten some years ago to support external systems very well, and I was one of the people working on that. That didn't touch on authorization.
Oh, okay. So what? Okay, but authorization has to do with setting permissions so that you're in the right group, for instance, as administrator or
yeah, exactly.
versus bureaucrat. Okay. It seems like the set of technologies around authentication/authorization keep changing. When I was starting out with MediaWiki, OpenID was the big thing, but that seems to have basically died out by now. Then there was OpenID Connect, which I don't know if that ever went anywhere. There were OAuth and OAuth 2.0, which are apparently pretty different from one another. And then there's Oath, which sounds like OAuth, but it's for authentication and not authorization. And then there's LDAP, SAML, not to mention Facebook Connect, Google's system, which is called Google Authenticator, and so on. And I think all of these have at least one MediaWiki extension that supports them. Do you see any evidence of standardization happening in the auth world, either in the set of protocols being used or in the MediaWiki code that's used to deal with them?
So I'm far from an authentication expert, but my understanding is that OAuth 2 is pretty much the standard thing these days.
Oh, okay.
That's mainly an authorization protocol, and OpenID Connect is the authentication protocol on top of it. So the naming is confusing, but as far as I understand, OpenID Connect doesn't have a lot to do with OpenID, and it's basically an authentication extension on top of OAuth.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
Many of the other technologies you mentioned are just specific examples of these. So I think Facebook Connect is something similar to OpenID Connect, and the Google Authenticator is an example of OAuth. OAuth is basically second-factor authentication, and there is a standardization effort for second-factor authentication called web authentication, which has recently become a W3C standard.
Wow. Okay. Okay, I guess I was totally wrong about OpenID Connect then. But if you want to connect to, say, an LDAP server, like Active Directory, which is probably the most typical case from my experience, how does that relate to all of these things?
That doesn't at all. LDAP and SAML is kind of a different word. So those are, I guess, enterprise technologies and not really web technologies. So those are typically used in a company context. And
yeah, I mean, there's been, as far as MediaWiki is concerned, there's been sort of a rotating set of extensions that have come about to integrate with all of these. Do you think that that's going to you think it's going to stabilize and there will be one or a set of extensions that will just become the norm for, I don't know, for at least the next little while?
So for the web context, so for authenticating with systems which are provided by a third party and not controlled by your organization, I think OAuth 2 is pretty much the standard these days, and that has sadly not been supported by MediaWiki, but it's getting OAuth 2 support right now, so hopefully the support situation is going to be pretty good there. And
yeah,
web authentication is for OAuth is for authorization or passing the task of identifying you to some other service. And web authentication is basically replacing the password prompt with something more flexible that is still handled by the user or the tools of the user, the browser, or your token generator on your phone or stuff like that. So those are the two standard parts of web-based authentication and authorization. So those are getting standardized, and the MediaWiki support is getting decent because OAuth 2 support is implemented as we speak, and the OAuth extension is actually being rewritten to support web authentication.
Oh, great. Okay. Are you involved? Sorry, are you involved in that?
No.
Okay. So some of the support will be directly in core MediaWiki?
Yes, some of the support is, to a very limited extent, it's already in core MediaWiki. I mean, the entire authentication framework has been rewritten a few years ago to make it easier to support things like login flows where you get redirected to another page and the actual login happens there and then you get redirected back, which is, for example, how OAuth works. So a lot of the machinery for that is in core. There is a grant system for core, which is a central concept of OAuth that the user can provide grants to applications. Like there is a tool which I permit to edit in my name, but not to delete pages in my name. So even if I'm an administrator, it only gets permission to do normal user things in my name.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, so it's not about you joining a certain group. It's a very precise set of permissions that you get that are retrieved from whatever the outside system is.
Yes, and those permissions can depend on how you log in. So you can have a bot which logs in your name, but it uses a different set of credentials than your normal login. And then it gets a reduced set of permissions. And if someone hijacks the bot, which is presumably easier than stealing your password, then they still aren't able to do particularly dangerous things with it.
Sure. So, well, we've covered two things that I guess growth you've only been involved in for a relatively short while, and authentication you're only, I guess, tangentially involved in, although you clearly know what's going on there. But what are some projects that you have been seriously involved in over the last 6 years?
Well, the authentication rewrite was a pretty major thing, but that's kind of...
so you were involved in that. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
That was kind of an abstract change. So we worked on the MediaWiki framework support for authentication extensions, but not on any specific authentication extensions.
I get it. Right. Okay.
That might well have been the largest project I have been involved in. Multi-content revisions has been another very large project. Multi-content revisions is basically transforming the architecture of MediaWiki core so that a revision version of the page can contain multiple content items. So the main existing example for that is structured data on Commons, Wikimedia Commons, the image repository for the wikis, so that image pages can contain both wiki text, free-form description, and a structured item which contains things like image tags or licenses in a machine-readable form. But in the long term, it can be used for a huge list of different interesting things.
Yeah. That was discussed in some early episode, which I can't remember now. Okay. Anything else that jumps out at you from from the last 6 years?
Well, I worked on Media Viewer and Upload Wizard when I was on the multimedia team. So I was involved in the big Super Protect debate.
Oh, okay.
Interesting times.
The infamous Super Protect project. Although, well, Media Viewer was somewhat infamous too. Maybe less so.
Well, it was the same thing, basically. Same controversy.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry, it's been a while. It slipped my mind. Yes, it's all sure. Okay, right. Yeah. Well, I guess that must have been pretty early on in your time at the Wikimedia Foundation.
Yeah, in the first year, end of the first year.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have some moment when you thought, "What have I gotten myself into?"
It was certainly stressful. I have been in the Wikimedia community for a long time by then, so that helped.
Yeah. Okay.
So I didn't really feel like a new person.
Right. As I mentioned before, you were at the Wikimedia Technical Conference, which was held in Atlanta, Georgia, just a few weeks ago. You were one of, I think, about 60 people who were invited to attend. So how did the conference go?
I found it pretty useful.
Yeah.
I think the Wikimedia Foundation has gone a long way in organizing conferences and improved a lot. And these days they are very action-packed and very focused.
Yeah, okay. The theme for this year was developer productivity, which usually means things like avoiding interruptions or finding the right IDE, etc. But in this case, I think it had more to do with coordinating development effort, having clear documentation, more group-oriented stuff. Is that right?
With those things as well, with continuous integration, with supporting local development environments. So the background for this was that the technology department of the foundation is reorganized, and the developer productivity team or super team, it's actually 3 different teams, I think, together. So a developer productivity department is being created, and the conference was mainly about helping them prioritize their work or setting their roadmaps.
Yeah. How big a problem is developer productivity for the Wikimedia/MediaWiki development effort, in your opinion? I'm not really asking about individual productivity, like should everyone be drinking more energy drinks? But just are there any big bottlenecks in development, whether it's people who aren't given enough work to do or developers working a long time on code that doesn't end up getting merged in, that kind of thing?
In my opinion, it's a huge problem. So on one hand, MediaWiki is pretty complicated, not very well documented, so the movement didn't have many professional or experienced documentation writers. So there is a lot of low-level documentation, but not much documentation that actually helps you get oriented and find your way if you want to start MediaWiki development.
Right.
I hear it being said that normally people expect a new developer to be up to speed after 3 months, and for MediaWiki that's usually the double.
Wow, okay.
And on certain areas we have very outdated technologies. That's more true for front-end than back-end, I think. So if you do MediaWiki front-end development, that's very different from how you would do front-end development everywhere else. What tools are you be able to use and so on. And we have big problems with code review integrating, especially volunteer patches.
Yeah. Well, so let's get to all of those. For the first one, is the lack of documentation. Does that affect mostly volunteer developers, or also people who are joining the Wikimedia Foundation and all of a sudden have to deal with this huge code base that they can't understand?
Yeah, it definitely affects both groups.
Yeah. And the second thing you mentioned was no, I've already forgotten.
Outdated front-end standards, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, are you talking about OOUI specifically, or just the fact that it's it's kind of a patchwork of things?
Not so much OUI, but that as well. But if you do front-end development these days, then you would use things like Webpack for building assets from the source code. You would use frameworks like React. None of that is really available if you work on MediaWiki. So the front-end development is moving very quickly, and paradigms change every few years, and MediaWiki is several years behind.
Yeah, probably more than several. But I saw there actually was a discussion at the conference about JavaScript frameworks. I don't know if you were involved in that one.
Yeah, I wasn't involved. That's a big ongoing discussion, both at the conference and outside of it. There is a front-end standards group which is trying to figure out where to go with MediaWiki's front-end tooling support. But that's not something I'm personally involved in.
But in your opinion, should MediaWiki be using Angular or React or Vue or one of those, or have its own comparable framework?
I doubt we have the resources to maintain our own thing. So yeah, I think we should just standardize on one of the mainstream frameworks, which is not trivial, because in the JavaScript world the half-life of frameworks tends to be pretty short, but even so it's probably worth the effort.
Well, so not to put you on the spot, but if you had to choose one to use, what do you have an opinion on that?
I don't really. I have mostly done backend development in the last few years.
Yeah, okay. So then, as far as the last thing you mentioned, productivity-wise, of getting doing code review, that seems to be to always be a topic that people, that just aren't enough people doing code review, or not enough people authorized to merge in patches. Is that the main problem, or is there more just an issue of coordination that people are submitting patches that aren't necessarily wanted, or that haven't necessarily been discussed enough, that kind of thing?
I think it's both, but in terms of coordination, the problem is maybe not that much that people are submitting problematic patches, but we don't really have a process of keeping track of patches being submitted. If you are a new contributor and you cannot figure out how to add the right people as reviewers, then one might notice your contribution, even if it's perfectly good.
Yeah. But okay, how much does that affect Wikimedia Foundation developers? I mean, is that a big bottleneck as far as just the standard process of development within the organization?
So when you work on your team's official roadmap and your code is being reviewed by your team members, then basically not at all. It's pretty easy to coordinate within a team how code review happens. When you work outside outside of the code that's maintained by your team, either because it's volunteer-ish work or 10% experimental work, or just because your team needs to change something in MediaWiki core, then it tends to be a pretty big problem sometimes.
Yeah. Well, in that case, how big an issue is all of this in general? I mean, my understanding is for better or worse, the percentage of volunteers, of developers who are volunteers, keeps decreasing. I I talked to Derek Jan Hartman a few episodes ago, and he more or less made it seem like he's the last volunteer standing. Obviously, there are people getting in, and that's one way to get into the Wikimedia Foundation effort and all that. But as far as current day-to-day development, how big a problem is it if volunteers? Well, two of the things you mentioned, if it's hard for them to get acclimated to the code base, and it's hard for them to get their patches reviewed.
So in the first case, I would hope that we would have many more volunteers if the entry process would be easier. I think we have a fairly large number of volunteers even so. The ratio of patches that are done by volunteers is smallish, which is not surprising because paid employees have 40 hours a week to work on patches and volunteers have much less. But even so, what I seem to recall is it's something like 20-ish%, so it's not tiny.
And, wow, okay.
There
I didn't know that.
Plenty of components that are actually maintained by volunteers. So, for example, abuse filter, which is a pretty key component for Wikipedia, which is it's a simple programming language for reviewing edits and blocking vandalism, basically. That's for example, completely volunteer maintained. Everything used by Wikisource for OCR and related processes is volunteer maintained. So, and that's only the MediaWiki code. There is a huge area of volunteer maintained code. That was one of the topics of the conference. That there are a bunch of volunteer maintained tools on the cloud services, ToolForge, Cloud VPS. So external tools in some sense of external, but still running on the infrastructure maintained by the movement. And we don't do a very good job of even tracking how many tools there are, how many volunteers there are working on them, how much work is happening.
Yeah.
And the tools there are overwhelmingly volunteer maintained. And there is also the on-wiki code. So gadgets on the wikis, templates, which can sometimes include proper code involving a programming language called Lua. That's almost entirely volunteer maintained. And again, we don't really have a good idea of how many people are involved, whether those communities are growing or decreasing. And usually they have terrible work environments in the sense that they basically have to write code in a Wikipedia text editor window without any kind of support for continuous integration or code review or whatever.
Yeah. Did anything concrete come out of the conference related to productivity or otherwise?
I am not aware. Usually there are no big decisions made at these conferences because they are not very inclusive. They involve a fairly small number of people, and because of that, they are not really proper as a decision-making forum. So the people who organize the sessions use them to prepare decisions, but not actually make them. So you might hear in the next few months the decisions that were based on feedback there.
Yeah. The last day of the conference was an unconference, and there was a very interesting session there that I think you led about Federated MediaWiki, which I think is about being able to have wikis that can work more closely alongside one another as opposed to each one being standalone. And I guess this ties back into the OAuth stuff we were talking about before. What kinds of things can be coordinated among wikis in theory?
Well, a lot of different things. Authentication is definitely a big thing. So I would really like to see how people being able to roll their own wiki and then just outsource authentication to the Wikimedia cluster. And not just authentication, but user identity. So that involves being able to log in at Wikimedia with your Wikimedia password. That involves being able to transcode your user page from the Wikimedia central wiki meta.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That can involve some level of user management, like if someone gets blocked as a spammer centrally, then somehow be able to take advantage that instead of having to do the same block locally.
Well, that starts to sound a little dangerous, if you get blocked on Wikipedia and then all of a sudden you can't log into, some unaffiliated wiki or something.
Well, there are pros and cons, and it would have to involve keeping track of the different kinds of blocks. So being blocked for getting into an editor is different from being blocked as a spammer. But
right.
Cross-wiki spam is definitely even currently a big problem on Wikipedia, that there are people using spam bots for inserting links and hopping from wiki to wiki. And Wikimedia has a dedicated workforce, volunteer, but still dedicated workforce for dealing with these people, and the tiny wiki might not have. So that's one type of content, but then sharing content might make a lot of sense in certain cases as well. Sharing images, so using images from commons already works to some extent, but for example, from a copyright point of view, you could imagine a lot of improvements, like getting notifications when something gets deleted, or making sure that local caches get purged when something gets deleted, because it might get deleted for a copyright violation reason, and then it's important to be fast. And then one very big topic is sharing tools. So gadgets, templates, Lua modules, these things are currently, you have to reinvent them every time you create a new wiki. That's a big problem even within the Wikimedia cluster, that they are not shared in any way. And if you start a new Wikipedia in a small language, then you don't have all the tooling that other wikis use. You don't have info boxes, you don't have user boxes, all those kind of things would be great to share within and outside the Wikimedia cluster.
Yeah. That's that already is supported, I guess, with the so-called scary transclusion.
I haven't heard of anyone using that, which might be because of the name, but I think the name is like that for a reason.
Yeah, okay. Is that something that you are working on or talking with people about? I mean, is there more chance now that that'll happen as a result of the session you held?
Well, talking definitely. Working, we'll see. I have worked on it a little bit as a volunteer, so I am involved in something called Wikispore, which is basically an attempt to run an incubator type of wiki farm where people can experiment with new project ideas. So in the Wikimedia movement had an early phase for maybe the first decade where they tried a lot of new things. Wiktionary, Wikisource. All those things were created then. And since 2007 or so, that basically stopped, and we don't really have any processes or infrastructure that's actually functional for trying out new things, and that means we miss a lot of opportunities in covering different areas of free content, and so we are hoping to change that, and that's well, of course. Well, I guess if I feel obligated to mention Wikidata and Wikivoyage, which I'm sure you know about, but I would argue that Wikivoyage it existed, so it has been created outside of the Wikimedia movement and just got annexed basically. And
Right.
Wikidata was actually planned in 2005, 2006. It took a lot longer to actually develop it because it cost a lot of money, and it was developed when Google donated, I think, $3 million to the foundation. But
yeah, it was actually Wikimedia Germany, not even the foundation.
yeah, Wikimedia Germany.
So that
correct.
ties into your point. Yeah.
But basically, the idea was conceived in 2006. So all of the existing projects were.
All right. That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I mean, with a full federated MediaWiki approach, you wouldn't even necessarily need the backing of the Wikimedia Foundation to create your own project that ties in with these other existing sites. I guess if you wanted two-way communication, then you would need it. But if you just want something that whatever it is, a wiki about jokes or whatever that has the same login as Wikipedia, then you can have that.
Yeah, on one hand, yes. On the other hand, I would hope that it would be easier to get that backing, because right now it's a lot of technical effort to set up a new project, and there isn't really any social mechanism for deciding that a project didn't work out and removing it. And because of these two factors, people are very unwilling to experiment.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying in general, sort of unrelated to the technical stuff, you're saying that people should be more. People should be should be more.
That is definitely a social problem.
More open-minded.
We have projects that most people agree have failed, but we have no way of closing them, and that's an obstacle to opening new projects, because people are worried of building up this pile of not really working projects. But there are many technical problems as well. So currently the way the Wikimedia cluster of wikis work, they are very tightly coupled together. So anything bad happens on even the tiniest wiki, then you have really big problems. Like database access vulnerability means you can immediately access English Wikipedia or whatever. JavaScript XSS vulnerabilities are very easy to bring over from one wiki to the other. If you overload the database in a tiny project, it's going to affect the large ones. So the whole infrastructure is not set up in a way that would be very friendly to experimentation. That's another thing I would hope to change with a more federated setup. And of course, Wikidata has its own federation project going on, which is that they would like to see Wikibase being used outside of the Wikimedia controlled set of wikis. So they are hoping that cultural institutions set up their own Wikibase, and then those can share information with Wikidata.
Yeah, sure, but it's but that's sharing. Well, from my understanding, it's sharing via the so-called semantic web, where everyone's publishing their data, and it's not the kind of sharing you're talking about, where wiki pages are can be transcluded back and forth.
So that depends on the details, but for example, it makes a lot of sense to set up your own Wikibase, but then being able to use the properties from Wikidata, because you don't want to invent your own ontology, and then that's, from the software point of view, that's proper federation. So the local Wikibase has to be able to read the property database of Wikidata.
That's true. Yeah, you got me there. Moving on from the conference, and I guess from technical stuff, this is something I've wanted to talk about on this podcast, and now I have an excuse to talk about it. I know that in the last few years, there have been a few people who have brought up the idea of having the Wikimedia Foundation go into the MediaWiki consulting business. Obviously, the Wikimedia Foundation is a non-profit, so it couldn't do that directly, but it could set up a corporation the same way the Mozilla Foundation has the Mozilla Corporation. And my excuse for talking about it is you wrote an essay advocating that 2 years ago. I think it originally was meant to be discussed at the developer conference that year, but that doesn't matter now. Anyway, it's a short essay called Make MediaWiki Commercially Viable. And here's some of what you wrote. The Wikimedia movement is currently not in a good position to sustain its own growth. Volunteer developer participation is shrinking, and the only significant money stream is donations to the Wikimedia Foundation. And then skipping ahead a little. This poses a problem as the current amount of technical resources are ridiculously low even compared to the current popularity and impact of the movement, not to mention the size of our ambitions. Do you remember writing all this, by the way?
Sure.
Okay. So then you note that our biggest competitor, if that's the word, is Atlassian Confluence. I think that's right. I think that MediaWiki is the most popular wiki software, and Confluence is the second most popular, just based on my sense. You guessed that Confluence earns $100 million a year for Atlassian, which sounds reasonable. And then you compared that to the annual technology spending of the Wikimedia Foundation, which is around $30 to $40 million a year. So obviously, if the WMF were to get even a fraction of that $100 million amount, it could give a big boost to the WMF's technology budget. So do you still believe in this idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge missed opportunity. I didn't specifically advocate for the foundation to do this work. So the way I see it, if the enterprise MediaWiki community takes off, for example, and is able to collect significant funds and channel some of those funds into work on MediaWiki core, that's just as good an outcome. For example, if Wikia gets a lot of money, which to some extent does happen, and they employ a bunch of core developers. If you look at other examples, that's usually how it works. So, for example, Linux is a huge success, but not a lot of Linux developers are employed by the Linux Foundation. Mostly there are a bunch of big commercial companies which invest their earnings back into Linux. So personally, I would hope for some model like that, but I think that the current reality is that the Wikimedia Foundation might have to kickstart that in some way by doing PR work around MediaWiki or enterprise-oriented development work.
Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, it's a big difference whether it's just companies pooling their resources on their own, or whether the Wikimedia Foundation / movement gets involved in it. I mean, if it were the latter, if there really were some kind of Wikimedia initiative, do you imagine that there would be some kind of new consulting company set up, or a new hosting company, that sort of thing?
I don't really know enough about organizational law in the United States to have a good opinion on that. Personally, I think the ideal structure would be the one where the Wikimedia Foundation itself is not involved in consulting, because it's a distraction from its core mission.
Yeah, okay. This sounds different, not to put words in your mouth, but this sounds different from what you wrote in the essay. Maybe your views have changed?
No.
Or maybe that was just sort of a way to start the conversation? Maybe
I just didn't express very well what I have been thinking. My views definitely have not changed in this.
Okay. Well, why? You say that the... no, okay. I guess I would just interpreted what you meant differently. I mean, well, you talked about the fact that the money from that revenue stream would go toward paying for Wikimedia developers to handle more enterprise-oriented stuff, like making it easier to install extensions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think that the way we can kickstart the growth of the enterprise ecosystem is the Wikimedia Foundation doing some of the needed work in this area, like adding a proper installation and upgrade system to MediaWiki and admin panel, those kind of things. So that I think in my mind the ideal outcome would be if that would be a temporary work and then enterprise commercial companies would take over that kind of thing. But there are definitely many different ways in which this can play out. So the casing is that we should have a more vibrant commercial ecosystem around MediaWiki. Whether or not the foundation, Wikimedia Foundation, or the Wikimedia movement has any involvement in it.
Yeah. And I guess for you, the Linux Foundation is a good role model for that, for, that a bunch of companies devote resources, or a bunch of companies send in funding to a central source.
But they don't even send a lot of funding to a central source. So they certainly donate to the Linux Foundation, but mostly they just pay their own Linux developers.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess this is a good segue to talking about Enterprise MediaWiki. You've attended the last few Enterprise MediaWiki conferences, and you're one of relatively few Wikimedia Foundation developers who have attended, although I think it's a growing number. We had quite a few because the last one was in San Francisco. But what made you interested in attending?
Well, mainly what you have said, that I think that it's important for the future of both MediaWiki, the technology, and the Wikimedia movement to have a well-functioning commercial ecosystem, enterprise ecosystem around MediaWiki. And for that, it helps if core developers understand more of the enterprise world, understand the use cases, understand the needs, try to build communication channels, that kind of thing.
Well, it's just I guess this sort of it all sort of ties in now, that the stuff you're talking about with volunteer. With making it easier for volunteers to contribute, and volunteer productivity ties into this too. I mean, it's
and we talk about volunteer productivity, but of course for paid developer productivity for everyone who doesn't work for the Wikimedia movement organizations.
Right, not quite volunteers. Right, I don't know if there's a term for that. People who aren't volunteers but also aren't actually, trying to improve Wikipedia.
Yeah, sadly, I don't think we even have the terminology for talking about these things.
I mean, from my experience, well, I include myself in that group, but most of the development effort is focused around extensions and some around skins, but not that much around on core MediaWiki itself. Maybe because people are just afraid to touch it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, and the development experience for extensions is also something that could be improved. For one thing, installing extensions could be easier, but also we don't really highlight extensions that are very popular or very important or well written. So if someone does great work as an extension developer, they aren't really rewarded for it by people looking for extensions having a very easy job of identifying or finding their extension. We don't really support. So you have to choose between GitHub and Gerrit currently. If you choose GitHub, then you don't get all the involvement that Gerrit extensions get of people automatically going there and updating your code when they change something in core. If you choose Gerrit, then the CI infrastructure is not very up to present day standards. So.
Right. Well, that's not really, I don't know if there's anything that could be done about that short of moving everything over to GitHub. I mean, Garrett does seem to be somewhat of a standard.
Well, that's a constant point of discussion, whether it should be the standard. The CI system is going to be completely revamped and might end up using GitLab, which is sort of the open source version of GitHub. But that's not something I know much about.
Oh, I didn't know about any of that. Okay. CI is code integration.
Yeah, continuous integration. So,
continuous integration. Right.
There is an ongoing consultation about the next generation CI, how that should look and what system should use. So currently it uses Jenkins, and nobody's really happy with that.
Oh, really? I was going to say I really like it. I mean, I just think it's so great that you check a patch in and there's just all this testing and validation that happens automatically before it's allowed to be merged in.
I mean, that's certainly a good thing, but the infrastructure we have for that, it has a lot of pain points. So we would like to have that a lot easier and probably better integrated. So if you are an extension developer and you check the patch in and it actually fails continuous integration, then you don't have a very easy time finding out what's going on, what the exact error is, reproducing the error. So all those things should be easier. And there is a lot of planning happening around that. But again, I am not really knowledgeable about it.
Yeah, okay. Something you were talking about before, I think ties into stuff you've written about before or tried to get people interested in, which is making extension documentation on MediaWiki.org better, so that it's more, whether it's I guess star ratings or just making it easier to know which extensions are popular for any specific task.
Yeah, so the standard these days is having an application store, and I think that should be the vision, and we should be thinking on how we can take steps towards that. And that involves collecting feedback, collecting ratings. It involves eventually building the whole thing inside MediaWiki, so you can just go to your admin panel and get a list of things that you could install, or get a list of things that are currently installed and see whether they are still maintained or whether they have security patches that are not installed. And of course, the things that can be done currently are a lot less grandiose, and the one I have been working on a little bit is using structured data in extension pages. So extracting information from the code of the extensions. We have the extension.json files which contain a lot of information, like what core versions this extension is compatible with, or what kind of hooks it is implementing, so on, and that could be automatically surfaced on the extension pages.
Yeah, sure. MediaWiki.org could be looking at all those JSON file extension.json files, and right now there's a lot of duplicated information.
We have a very horrible mechanism for doing that, which involves about pasting all the information into a Lua module and then the extensions invoking the Lua module, so it sort of exists. It's slightly
is anybody using that?
The standard extension template is using it, but I think currently it's only using it for one or two fields, so it's very limited. Yeah,
that's the JSON config extension, something like that.
No, it's a bot called JSON extension downloader or something like that.
Oh, okay. I'm vaguely aware of that. I mean, do other people agree with you on this? Is there any chance that something will be done on this front?
I don't know if anyone is disagreeing. The question is more whether other people are willing to invest work into it, and currently I don't really have time to do that either. So I think it will improve eventually, but slowly. So the Wikimedia Foundation is currently not really on the leadership level. There is a lot of skepticism about enterprise MediaWiki being an important use case. So there is currently not much of a chance of resources being put into this on the Wikimedia Foundation level. That might somewhat be changed, I think, by Wikimedia Germany, because for them the third-party use of Wikibase is in their roadmap, and that brings up the same problems of third-party sort of enterprise-ish use of MediaWiki, of course.
Right. Okay. Well,
plus,
yeah. I mean,
plus there is a huge strategic consultation going on. So the movement is basically setting up a strategy for the next 10 years, and that might change pretty much anything.
Oh yeah, the whole 2030 initiative or whatever it is.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, heaven help us if Wikibase turns out to be the big salvation for enterprise MediaWiki. I don't know. I'm skeptical about most uses of Wikibase.
So Wikibase is a niche that is entirely distinct from the kind of things that the current enterprise stack of semantic MediaWiki or Cargo would be used for. But many of the underlying needs of making MediaWiki easy to install and maintain are shared.
That's true. Yeah, what you're saying makes sense. And if it ends up leading to a better install process and better documentation and all that, then I really can't complain. Yeah, all right. Great. Well, we've covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I guess that means no.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. I'll probably cut that part out. Yeah, it was great talking to you, and I'm glad to hear from your perspective, support for enterprise MediaWiki on a personal level. That's it's really important. I think that people from the Wikimedia Foundation share that view. Share the views of the enterprise MediaWiki community on a lot of this stuff.
Well, thanks for inviting me to the program. I'm a big fan of Between the Brackets.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. A listener. That's really cool. Thanks for coming on the program. It was great talking to you. And this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Gergő Tisza of the Wikimedia Foundation, for a great interview. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next time.